you for being here today. Hope you enjoyed a little bit of extra time last week and really appreciate your flexibility in letting us work through some issues related to this iteration of the standards. And we really wanted to make sure we gave you plenty of time to go through the great work that's been done on those drafts so that you you could dig in and really have a deep understanding as we go to vote today. But first, we have bumped the TSPC conversation a couple of times now, so we want to make sure that we start with that first so that we have plenty of time for that. So I would like to introduce Melissa Goff. She is the Interim Executive Director of TSPC and also the Director of Licensure, Elizabeth Keller. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Co-Chair Fritz. We are really pleased to be here with all of you today and to be able to share with the council the relationship between the work that you've done so far with our regarding ed prep programs and the work left to be done related to requirements of licensure. So Director Keller and I will walk you through our PowerPoint. I'm going to ask if you could hold questions until the end. I think that might be easiest for us to get through. And I think Alex is going to bring that PowerPoint up for us and we can go ahead and get started. Thank you. We're both in the same room, so we're going to try not to get feedback as we're speaking to you. We'll see how well we do this. So Director Keller, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Elizabeth Keller, Director of Licensure here at TSPC.
Okay, we can move slides. So we're going to talk, we'll give a brief overview to remind you, get some setting around the executive order. And then the presentation is going to, as I said, talk about licensure requirements and the program standards, and how those are different. We need to talk a little bit about in-state requirements and requirements for out-of-state applicants, renewal requirements, the relationship of this work with the Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact, which passed in the 2023 legislative session, and then consider other considerations for you as a council. All right. So we wanted to, because you've been working with program standards to this point, we wanted to make sure that you understand that the standards that you're working on and that we as a council are bringing to kind of closure here are the markers of quality that have been established by the commission by the time the commission adopts them, right? So, and the development of standards is influenced by goals and theories of change that the state adopts to address quality of learning for students. And we adopt standards related to the programming and the work that EPPs need to do to achieve those student outcomes of their students, the future teachers, future educators. The standards focus, as you know, on knowledge and skill expectations, and they are used to also measure program quality and improvement. That's how we look at education prep programs. Shifting over to the left side of the screen, licensure requirements define the evidence that we need as an agency to be able to grant a license or renew a license for somebody. Some of those requirements right now include a bachelor's degree. There are a few exceptions, but most of our licenses require a bachelor's degree, preparation program completion, passing a content knowledge assessment, and passing background clearance. So you can see that where the program standards are related to this is around the preparation program completion. So we know that if a graduate from an Oregon education preparation program comes to us, having been signed off by that program, we know that they have met the standards because the standards are required of that ed prep program. Okay, next page. We also have some challenges with addressing the differences between in-state licensees and out-of-state. So Currently, in-state licensees complete a program. They get what's called a PCR report from the Ed Prep program that shows that they've completed their program. They demonstrate their content knowledge through testing usually, but sometimes by a process called multiple measures, which allows people who maybe aren't great test takers, for example, to demonstrate their mastery in alternate ways. They have to have a current background check and complete their application, do their fee through a portal. They submit their transcripts to us so that we can verify information that's required. After all of that information is collected, then our evaluator reviews that information and makes a determination on whether the candidate qualifies for a license or if an additional information is needed. At that time, they're granted a preliminary teaching license, and that lasts for 3 years. Out-of-state applicants, however, have a different pathway if they're asking for what's called a reciprocal license. So that means that they have a license already in another state, and they are asking for that license to be enough to demonstrate that they should be able to get an Oregon license. So of course, they have to show us that they have that license in the other state, and it can't be a restricted license. They also have to do a background clearance and pay for the application. They have to submit their transcripts. Then the evaluator takes a look at all of that information and determines whether they can have a reciprocal teaching license with the state based on the licensure that they received in the other state. That license is good for only 1 year. Additionally, if a candidate can demonstrate that they meet items 1 through 6 and pass appropriate content knowledge assessment, then they could be issued a preliminary teaching license. So if there is, for example, there may be an assessment that we want to make sure that they have either completed through their prior program or that we would require them to take in order to be issued a preliminary teaching license. I think one of those requirements, for example, will be the civil rights test when that comes back into play. Next page. You want to take this?
So then we've got the people who are already licensed here in Oregon. They hold a preliminary license. That's considered the license held by new and novice teachers by statute. We require professional development units to renew that license every 3 years because of COVID and issues with availability of professional development during COVID. The commission has suspended the requirement that they submit professional development units. We're going to take a look at that over the next year or so to determine if and when and how to bring it back. The professional teaching license reflects advanced competencies and experience. They have 4 years of full-time experience or 6 years of half-time or more experience as a teacher, and they have completed some kind of an advanced professional development program. Mostly you'll see people who have, let's say they had an elementary endorsement on their preliminary license and they add the English as a second language endorsement. That requires a program. That's the 5-year license. And again, the same thing, renewable with professional development units, but also on hold for those teachers to renew right now. Next slide, please. Administrators follow a similar pathway to teachers. We have 2 levels of license under administration. One is the principal license, mainly prepared for building level administration and some district level assignments. The principal license is valid for 3 years. We did the redesign on this a while back, and there were lots of people who said they wanted to stay a principal and didn't want to have to move. If you were ever on the initial administrator license, you had 10 years to finish. This principal license allows you to renew that continuously. The professional administrator license is valid for district-wide administrator positions required when you're a superintendent or an assistant superintendent. And it's valid for 5 years. They also, like under the teaching license, have completed an advanced program, additional coursework, dealing more with school administration at the district level. Every license in Oregon is authorized in grades pre-K through 12, and in particular, an administrator can work in any grade level. Teaching licenses can also work under any grade level, but there are some limits placed by courses that their endorsement is allowed to teach. The administrators are not part of the Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact, and that's on the next slide. We'll go into that a little more. And we need to address these existing license holders' renewal requirements and applicants from other states. So the next slide, please. Talking about the Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact, was passed in 2023, Senate Bill 279. It's an agreement to honor licenses from other participating states if they apply here. I'm a member of the commission that is implementing this compact. It's a 12 to 18 month process to implement these typically. There's some software considerations that will allow us to share documentation between the states a little more easily. And that would only be with the states in blue. Everybody else would still have to submit their official transcripts to us separately and all that. I don't know when this will be implemented, but there is some concern that adding requirements to those coming from out of states could cause some issues with our participation in the Mobility Compact, because we are in essence agreeing to honor another state's preparation and licensure of teachers and administrators. Next slide, please. And I think maybe I've spoken about, yes, unencumbered closest equivalent license granted to the candidate by the participating states. So if someone comes to me from Utah and they just finished their program, they have their Utah license, I would grant them the preliminary license without many questions. It does exclude the restricted probationary, provisional, substitute, temporary licenses. Career and technical educator licenses are not included here. That's a very state-specific process. But again, we must carefully consider placement of literacy requirements on these licenses to align with our commitment under the Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact. So the next slide. Take this. Here we go.
Okay, so we have several considerations that we'd like you to think about, and we'll walk you through those. And really also one of the things that we were focused on is unintended impacts of options on our underrepresented educators, our rural educators, and educators with financial barriers. We're trying to think through how we can minimize or eliminate any barriers that might be created as we make these changes. Next slide. So the decisions that we really need from the council include things such as who must meet literacy requirements in the license and the endorsement areas that you've identified, that have already been identified. Do newly licensed educators only need to do this? Do out-of-state licensed educators also need to show their literacy proficiency? And do current Oregon licensed educators, and the council has talked about this a few times, do they need to demonstrate that they know these standards, that they've met these standards? The next question is, when do educators meet the literacy requirements to receive their license? Do they demonstrate it when they get their initial license, or do they demonstrate it with their renewal? What evidence does the council recommend be accepted by TSPC to meet the literacy requirements? And that's the conversation that Elizabeth and her team need, and that's the requirements side of the work. Next page. As we talk about wondering on the who, here are some of the challenges that we recognize. If newly licensed educators have additional requirements that existing educators don't have, that will create within our system inconsistency in what students have the ability to learn based on the proficiency and expertise of their teacher. However, a challenge is current Oregon licensed educators are across the continuum in their knowledge and understanding of best practices in early literacy. And thinking one of the challenges will be identifying ways not only for them to demonstrate their understanding of the standards, but pathways for them to enroll in necessary continuing education around literacy in order to strengthen their understanding and prepare them to qualify for licensure based on any requirements. That's something that's going to be really important for our educator preparation programs, because folks will be all along the continuum in understanding best practices in early literacy. And they may have taught for 10, 20, 25 years and feel fairly either competent or fairly entrenched in their approach to teaching of early literacy. And then, of course, out-of-state educators. That becomes a more complex conversation in terms of the mobility compact. We at TSPC this is something that we'll work with other agencies and the governor's office with the engagement in the teacher mobility compact. That agreement said we will not add requirements that would prevent any of your states from just automatically being okayed for your educators who got licensed in your states to come to Oregon. And the challenge is, as you looked at those blue states, they don't all have the same standards of literacy requirements that we have. So a blanket okay, unencumbered okay, which is the agreement around the compact, becomes challenging and something that we will be problem solving in our current work. Okay, next page. The when, I think we talked about this. It's very easy on the preliminary license to set on the preliminary license standards expectations, but so that is a time period. But the other time period is what year of graduation from ed prep programs, what year will this license requirement need to go into effect? And then we could also with keep this with each initial license that folks need to demonstrate, and then with renewals. And I think the renewal component will be a little more challenging, but really important when we're talking about children and their rights to be able to read. On the page. The evidence that we can use varies, and one of the states that's doing a good job with this is Colorado, and there's an embedded link in this slide that when you get the slide deck, you can link to as well, that shows how Colorado has set up their requirements. But we could have a standardized assessment, very common, which would get most people to be able to demonstrate their proficiency. We could simply require completion of an Oregon approved EPP program. So if someone comes in from out of state, they would need to enroll in an Oregon EPP program. We could have pre-approved district-led professional development, or we could have state agency facilitated professional development. And we can have a combination of all of those pieces to help people get to the point where they've met their literacy requirements. And I actually think it's going to take a combination of solutions for us to be able to effectively and affordably get our educators where we want them to be. Next page.
Interim Executive Director Goff, I just want to be mindful of time.
Oh, you linked. Thanks, Alex.
I just want to be mindful of
Alex,
time.
just really briefly, I saw linked over to the Colorado site. You can go over there if you want. There you go. So this is really nicely laid out for educators. They can just get in and see, let's see, have I done a reading endorsement? Do I need to take a look at license renewal? What types of training do I have for this work? So we will be looking at that in greater depth as well, using them in other states as a model for how they're tracking this information. Okay, now we can go back. Thank you. Next page. So the standardized assessments, just always thinking about the biases of standardized testing, potential language barriers. Okay, just about done. And it could be, but it could be a gateway for a lot of applicants to get a lot of applicants over the hump. Go ahead, Alex. We've talked about this. Go ahead. District-led professional development, one of the challenges is making sure that we have consistency of delivery and cohesion of coursework so that we are actually addressing all of those standards. It would be great in that it could be low to no cost for educators and would be a way for us to reach everybody across all of our districts and ESDs. Okay, next. State-led PD, we have a capacity issue with agencies to be able to deliver this work statewide. And it could be an additional unanticipated cost to current Oregon licensed educators if they have to pay to enroll in these courses. But we could have some quality assurance and consistency in our messaging about early literacy, which I think is going to be really important. Next. That's just a reminder of the decisions that we need.
Okay.
I think that is it.
All right. Thank you so much. So we want to make sure that the council has a few minutes to ask any big questions, but we do then have some time, although we're eating into it, some time to go into small groups because we know those tend to, be really rife with conversation. So any first clarifying questions about anything that was offered? Dr. Archer. You're muted.
So that as we looked at many states, many of them have adopted a standardized assessment used for in-state, out-of-state renewals and so forth. And how does TSPC go about selecting that to be certain that it matches the standards? Or do you write your own, as some states like Utah did? How do you perceive that going forward? Unmute. I do the same thing.
Right back at you, muting. Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And certainly there are standardized tests that other states who have similar standards use, and we would be looking at those assessments first as beginners. If they are missing information that is critical, we can work with vendors. The other piece is if we needed to, we could design. If we were to have to design the assessment, it would take much longer to do that work. So we would really be looking for an off-the-shelf vendor who's already working with other states whose literacy standards are similar, and then we would be looking for anything that isn't covered in those assessments.
I would presume that people from the council with expertise in this would be a part of that.
Yes, absolutely. We'd be using not only people from the council, but people from our educator preparation programs as well.
Thank you so very much. That was my main question. Thank you.
Other questions from other council members?
I have a question. So the states that were in the agreement already, have we reviewed like how far off they are from where we are right now? Is there any alignment in coursework or a way to figure that out?
Thank you for the question, Jennifer. That we have not done the research on that. But I would say that it's probably all over the place. And then as new states are added, you saw that there were some states that are in the process of trying to adopt the legislation. That it'll just get broader as it goes along. I know I've talked to Idaho. We get a lot of licensees coming over to Ontario, especially from Idaho. Idaho will not ever be a part of the compact. Because they have a couple of requirements like this that will prevent them. So, yeah.
Okay. Is this something that will be helpful for the whole group, Dr. Archer? Is this something we can talk about in small groups? You're muted. I can't hear you.
I would only ask questions that might be useful to all of us. And Elizabeth, so these states didn't have standards coming in. Can we add to what they're doing a universal assessment?
I think if we add an assessment, it threatens our participation in the compact because we're not accepting that somebody in another state had an elementary endorsement on their license and we're not able to give them right up front the equivalent. This compact is really meant to break down the barriers that way and accept everything from state to state.
So it breaks down the barriers, but it might also break down competency. Do you know the percentage of teachers in Oregon that arrive with a out-of-state licensure versus in-state? Do you know that, Melissa?
I'm
Off?
sorry, we're having to mute and unmute, but I think I heard you in the concern around competency of educators who are coming into the system. Yeah, it's we share that concern, and it's a conversation that we are going to need to be having, like I said earlier, a conversation we're going to need to be having within the agency, but also with the governor's office and key legislators who have been who are engaged in the ITMC passage that occurred prior to my coming to the agency, and prior to the adoption, it happened at the same time as the adoption of the literacy standards, the beginning of or not the literacy standards, but the beginning of the council. And so that we just didn't see that those two would potentially collide. So that is something we need to address.
Is it possible to have it attach the test to the professional level, like they come in as, is that a possibility?
That's a possibility. Absolutely.
Thank you so very much.
Okay, we want to make sure we have time for small group conversations, and I'm sure there'll be questions that also come up in those. So please make sure that you are taking note of those, because we will come back to share. So just to reiterate, these are the 3 questions that were brought to us by our TSPC colleagues, and Pooja just also put the slides in the chat that you can review as well. So we'll be splitting into 3 groups. Any other directions right now that we need to share?
I think we'll go into breakouts. It's going to feel like not enough time for breakouts, and that's totally fine. This is really the next deadline that the council has to meet. You know, we've been talking about educator preparation program approval standards, and we wanted to introduce you to the licensing piece of the council's work as well. So you can keep this in your mind as another to do, because it obviously intersects with the discussion we have been having around educator preparation program approval standards. So we'll have until 1:40 in breakouts, and we'll ask for you all in breakouts to just have one spokesperson that's an actual council member to be able to share a kind of a elevator pitch summary, 1 minute, really quick, in the full group at 1:40. So you're going to be in the breakouts again until 1:40.
All righty. I know our group was super, super ambitious and got through them all, but I know that was a short period of time. So we were going to share out now. So we had asked that each group have someone who was going to report out, and knowing we don't, again, have a ton of time, so there's so much to do in such a short period of time today. If your group can give an overview, that would be great. So group one.
Katie, will you do that?
Yes, we did not get through everything, but we had some really important discussions. I think we did kind of note that at some point, the importance of all teachers having this knowledge came up. We didn't, I think Melissa at the end was talking about maybe in renewal of licensure for some of this. And the other thing that came up that I want to make sure to highlight was kind of Val had brought up about some special licenses with like tribal languages, and Val, correct me if I'm not saying that right, but just that we're kind of thinking about, you know, what licenses would these fall under if there was a new assessment in terms of special licenses in terms of our tribal communities that would actually kind of eliminate those people from continuing to do that work in their schools.
Thank you.
That's not everything, so please jump in. We were wanted more time.
I appreciate the synopsis. Group two.
Was that us? Okay. We reached really quick consensus on the first question. And our consensus is that all three of those categories of teachers need to meet the requirements of the new literacy standards. And then with full recognition that this is a massively heavy lift, what we talked about in terms of when is well, for initial licensure for any candidates completing EPPs under the new literacy standards. And then in terms of teachers coming in through the ITMC, so from out of state, our understanding is that there's a 1-year window of that license is good. So our idea is that within that we have to honor that compact that already exists. So our idea is that 1 year would provide a 1-year window for any teachers coming in on that kind of license to get any additional training that they would need in order to be able to meet all of our literacy standards. And then in terms of already licensed teachers in Oregon, we thought that what made the most sense is same idea that by the next license renewal. So that's anywhere between a 1 and 5 year window, depending on where already licensed teachers are in their renewal cycle. We spent the bulk of our conversation on those first two and didn't have quite as much time on the what, but there was talk in favor of having a standardized competency exam. And then also, I felt like there was one other thing and I might be forgetting
Multiple measures too,
Yeah.
and then talking about administrators.
Yes. Oh, yes. And Heidi, I think, gave really good context that many admins come from a secondary background, and for that reason that it should be really the literacy standards should be front and center in admin certification programs.
Awesome.
Is that it? I think so.
Great job. And group three.
I think that's our group. Is there anybody else that wanted to do it? We didn't have time to pick someone. That to save time, I'll just go ahead. We also came to consensus pretty quickly that it needed to be all three groups, so that there was no question about that. There was discussion about the time when that would happen. Of course, preliminary licensed teachers or coming out of EPPs that would need it right then. Out of state, Jennifer expressed that we wouldn't want it to be, say, 3 years. We want that teacher to be effective and be able to teach kids very quickly. So giving a very short window of time for that, perhaps that year, kind of like you were talking about, Shanaz. And there was we didn't get to the what a whole lot, although there was a couple of were a couple of comments related to an assessment of some sort to show that. And Jennifer actually brought up an idea of perhaps some sort of competency that they could show through video of their teaching or something like that, that might be considered as well. I think that was it. Did I miss anything, group 3?
All right. Wow, that was awesome. Great work, everybody. It's a lot of things to discuss in a short period of time. Okay, so with that, obviously this isn't the last time we're going to be talking about this, but I think it was a good introduction. Anything else you want to share about this piece of it, Usha?
No, this is a great appetite whetter here on the licensing discussion, but we can kind of loop back to this conversation next month, depending on how our next conversation goes. So thank you all.
I did have one more point that I think is important for us all to consider, and that was brought up by Dr. Archer, that we would like to get teaching to be at the same level of professionalism, such as speech language pathologists who have to pass a pretty rigorous test to become SLPs. So thinking about teachers in that same sort of level of professionalism.
Well, also thinking about multiple ways of showing that assessment because of the knowledge of the bias in standardized assessments for some candidates. So.
All right. Am I up next?
Yeah, we'll tag team. You want to start us out?
Okay, I gotta get back to my notes. All right. So we are shifting over. Thanks everyone for those great conversations. That's excellent. So we're shifting over next to talk more about the recommendations. And sorry, I'm working on one screen today, so I'm having to toggle back and forth. So the subcommittee the last couple of weeks had some really hard scheduling challenges, so there wasn't really a time that all of us met at once. And at the time, we elected not to have any staff there to help us with some of that cohesion, and that complicated things a little bit. But as co-chairs, Dr. Gardner and I gave guidance to the staff and kind of helped them walk through the multiple sets of notes that we had from each of those sessions. So a lot of good work went into that. We want to acknowledge that we are not at perfection, and we weren't planning to be at perfection at this point anyway. But in that spirit of understanding that a lot of the effort went into this, and we've come a long, long way, we're going to ask you to do 3 things today. We'll have 3 different votes, so you can see the kind of the big picture of the votes that are needed, and then we're going to go on to do each of those votes one at a time. So if Alex, you could bring up slide 21. Okay. So the first vote that we are going to vote on is focused on all of the revisions, kind of as a big picture sort of thing, except for standard 5. And that's because that one's going to have a separate vote as a structural change. So we'll be looking at purpose, scope, dispositions, knowledge of literacy acquisition and instruction, literacy foundational skills, vocabulary, background knowledge, and comprehension, and then assessment and database decision-making, as well as field experiences. So thinking about those as a whole, we will do a fist to 5 on that. Do we have the same definitions of the fist to 5 that we had in the survey?
They'll be on the poll when we launch the poll here in just a moment. After you go through the next slide, we'll launch the polls.
Okay.
And Ken can share some background too. So
excellent. Okay, so on the next slide is the second decision point. Ken, were you going to kind of talk through a little bit of that? what the difference of those two and how we
Yeah, happy to do so. So just wanted to present kind of like the rationale for the two options here. One option, option one, has distinct standards for each focal student group. And option two is kind of the so-called kind of original version, which had one standard that spoke to each of the standards supporting the focal groups named there. And again, there wasn't clear consensus in either the subcommittee work or other discussions in the larger council. And so we thought it most appropriate to present both these structural options to the committee. You'll notice that the content is identical between the two. It is how they are structured. That is kind of the difference. So I just wanted to name that.
Yeah, and to kind of add to that, the conversation in the subcommittees around that was really talking about the differences in support for each of those separate groups. And so how it might be more clear or provide clarity to have those in 3 separate sections, but that was just that conversation. All right.
And then we have the next set of questions is just about the process that we are wanting to see if there are questions about how we're going to be developing revisions. Again, knowing that the purpose of this council is to provide recommendations. It was never going to be to have it exactly, you know, the way that TSPC might have, but nevertheless, we want to make sure that any revisions and suggestions we have that we can pass along with confidence to TSPC and make sure that they are spoken to and addressed. So do you have any questions about the process leading up to this point, about the revisions, about content, or just general what we're asking you to vote on before we start voting? Julie?
Yeah. So when I looked at so there are still areas that I think need a few revisions. So I guess, what are you asking us to vote on? And is there still opportunity to go back and do some revisions?
Mm-hmm. So we are speaking to those particular areas that were shared before. So one is looking at the standards that this council had already agreed on previously with some of the refinement of the public content or public comment from EPPs in particular that we've infused in the subcommittee helped to do. So that's the first vote. The second vote is really thinking about whether we are going to be pulling apart those other standards or having them stand together.
Right, because what I read in preparation for this, the document still had some wording that I know that we had worked on in the subcommittee. So is there still opportunity to do some further revisions later?
I think it will be, and I welcome, other people's thoughts here, that it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be 100% of what, but what can we trust that the spirit is there? Can we trust that refinements that we have, suggestions, wordsmithing, whatever you want to call it, will be taken up by TSPC with, the promise that they will highly consider them, but knowing again that what our charge as a council were recommendations, and we want to get them, to a place where we feel confident and we can vote on them, but knowing, that there may be some tinkering that still might need to happen. Jennifer?
Yeah, this just might help me vote on option 1 or 2, and maybe just more for the EPPs. When you're designing a class that meets all of the proficiencies, are you like taking them out by chunks, or is it like this class meets this standard, this standard, this standard? Or is it like this class is about multilingual learners, or this is about students with dyslexia? I'm just thinking about the best way sometimes things are organized for the programs to be able to indicate the proficiencies.
I would say yes. Because I think it just depends on the EPP
Yeah,
and the
right.
faculty and how they decide on curriculum. Again, knowing that some of these programs are multi-year programs, some of these programs are like a year and a half. So sometimes you do lots of different things, even within the same university or college. So, you know, what the onus on EPPs is to make sure that we demonstrate that those standards were not only taught, but that they were assessed, and that we know with confidence through all these other things that Executive Director Goff shared, that onus is on us to demonstrate and show proof that they have passed those things.
Jennifer, does that relate to the separation of the MLs and the, yeah, so, I mean, I think it's helpful as an someone in an EPP that helps us to kind of make sure that they're funneled to the right classes, but also that they're funneled kind of, that those are embedded throughout the program. So in a couple of ways, and the pedagogy is different for each one. So I think it's helpful to separate them. That's my take.
Rep right.
Well, thank you for all the hard work, by the way. As with our children in general, I believe this is a work in progress. And as you mentioned, Dr. Gardner, that we'll go through this and hopefully each year we'll improve on the standards and those kinds of things of what works and doesn't work. And I think that as EPPs go through this, they'll figure out that there are certain things that help teachers teach kids to read and certain things that don't. And I just want to make sure that everything that we do and to overall, I am appreciative of that, is that whatever gets in the way, whatever we produce gets in the way of specific teaching kids how to read is superfluous. So that's just me. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. And I'll just make one really quick observation about that, is that all of the EPPs in Oregon, and frankly, any nationally accredited EPP anywhere, goes through a continuous improvement process. We are constantly, it feels like daily, refining, using feedback. We talk to alumni, we talk to people who hire our alumni, we talk to teachers, we talk to the mentor teachers, we have university we have a million data points that we are collecting and monitoring on an annual basis, if not more frequently than that. And that's just part of us being able to be EPPs and our commitment to excellence. So every single EPP does that, and we are always refining and learning. And that's part of being a university, right? Like, we learn. So that's a good thing.
Good job. Thank you.
Dr. Archer. You're muted.
A number of times and looking at the standards that were added, and then some of them were duplicates and some of them we actually pinpointed, and I believe that in one document that Rhonda has pointed out to that, and it seems to me that we should honor all of that work and look at those changes before we have a general vote, because they are details that were within the spirit of making it a powerful document, but also reducing the number and not having a lot of duplications. And I believe, Julie, if you're still there, that was what you were trying to get at.
You are muted, Julie.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I do think that throughout the subcommittee meetings that I was in on, there was a lot of discussion about trying to make this doable for EPPs and make sure that it was something that could be implemented with intention. And to speak to what Jennifer said about how EPPs take standards and put them in, there is a lot of variation, and sometimes it's spread out across multiple classes. And one example of this is the culturally responsive practices standards that are in place. That's not just one class where our students learn about that. They learn about that in several classes. So we intentionally put it in multiple classes where I kind of see some of these standards could be possibly, that could be set up in that way depending on how the EPP decides to structure that.
Any other questions about the process or content? Shaunas?
This isn't a question, this is just something I wanted to say for the greater council that we talked about I talked about in the subcommittee work regarding option 1 of distinct standards or option 2 where they're all grouped together. And this is context that's more related to equity work, and that is that historically and even present day in many places, students who speak a language other than English at home, or maybe speak with an accent or don't have as proficient of English, are equated with having a disability just because English isn't their first language. So something that I like about option 1 is that those groups stand separate and equal, and that pulls them apart from being grouped together as disability and multilingual learners all in one. It's not bad to, we value all different kinds of learners. It's just some important equity work in pulling those two apart from being grouped together.
Thank you. So I've heard a couple comments about, the process, the next steps, especially with some of the recommended word changes. I know there was some more specificity that some members of the subcommittee forwarded, the other parts that there weren't necessarily consensus. But I think, wanting to get at what is the next steps after we would vote today. So we have a slide here. So this is really kind of what we are recommending. Again, since this council is an advisory body to the governor and TSPC, the council can choose to recommend what and how additional areas of work should be done in later stages. So this could be something like we have a new section that's just recommendations for further review. And we would, want to get into that. And this is kind of the process by which TSPC then would use. They have also lots of layers of checks and balances within their own rulemaking processes. So they have the EP and PC, Educator Programs and Pathways Committee that reviews the standards. They assess the scale of wordsmithing needed. If substantial changes are needed, the committee may recommend to TSPC to do additional work and solicit input from partners before sending it back to the committee. The Rules Advisory Committee puts the standards in the Oregon Administrative Rules format, and then the full commission reviews the standards and then decides what to do with them. Or, another process could be that we submit the standards as written directly to the Rules Advisory Committee. So there's some options here too to make us feel like any recommendations we have beyond what we've already voted on, beyond, what the revisions we're going to chat about today or vote on today. Beyond that, how we want these things handled. Pooja, would you say anything else about this process?
No, I mean, I think that I just want to underscore the staff role in the kind of subcommittee work was minimal. There wasn't staff actually in the subcommittees at all. So I just wondered, co-chairs, if you just want to kind of just share a little bit more about how the recommendations that went out last week were synthesized, because it was really intended to pull together the disparate notes just because of the scheduling issues with the subcommittee that the staff kind of put together in one place and offered this as a potential path forward. So I don't know if there's anything you want to share there, but that's all I wanted to share on this slide. Thank you, Co-Chair Gardner.
Mm-hmm. So as Co-Chair Fritz mentioned, we didn't have the full subcommittee together at any given point. So we went through the remainder of recommended changes from public feedback, the EPP feedback in particular, and we kind of did our own, quasi fist of 5 on each of those, and then flagged where there was further conversation. So we got through a substantial number of those, but we didn't finish them all in one of the meetings. And then there was another group, not the entire group again, that met, finished going through those, and then decided that, Rhonda, how would you summarize what that meeting was? Because I didn't.
What that meeting did was we tried to go through all of the notes and the Fista fives that went on for each of those sections, and tried to synthesize that information and put that into areas that we thought we could get all of the information in, but it required a lot of juggling, because it wasn't so an easy, like, take this out, put this in there. It had to sort of be tinkered with, I guess, a little bit. So there were some wording changes and things that we suggested in that final meeting that were also put into consideration with all of those other notes that had happened in the first two meetings. So it really was a huge lift for Kristen and Ken to take all of that information and try to compile that into one. So we were aware that there were going to be a few things that didn't get in because of some areas where there was no consensus. So that's kind of why we're where we're at this moment.
Any other questions about the process or content before we move to a Fista 5 on these couple of items?
I think just one more thing I would like to say is that I want us to be thinking about this in terms of content, because I don't know if it is an effective use of our time to spend a lot of time wordsmithing, because when I looked at all of the feedback, that, thank you so much for everyone who put that in there, there was a lot of comment about wordsmithing, about redundancies, things that are time consuming, and also like having the same verb tenses throughout. So just some of those basic things that I think aren't something that we're concerned about, but more about the content of what's in there and making sure we have in there what we need. So I know many of you added lots of different comments that that will be considered down the road also.
And I just want to share that the reason for that, and it's completely aligned with the expectations that the governor had from the outset of, you all are going it from a really a transformational change here from just if we were to zoom out, and compared to what we have now, what we have here in draft, even though it does need some wordsmithing, is a really, really giant lift and step forward, because you all have come together and done a lot of volunteer work. So from the governor to you all, I just want to really appreciate you. And we recognize that this 1 year time window was never enough to get all of the details of every single thing. That's why you had educator preparation program recommendations, licensing, and implementation, is to just give us like as much high level as you can do so that we can move this giant ship. And so you are moving this giant ship, and this ship also just needs to continue to have steam. I've got my metaphors are not good. They're doing bad now. I'm sorry. But my point is to say is that the TSPC Commission actually has a process where they do wordsmithing as part of their process to get things all aligned and ready for the rules process. And so you've actually gone above and beyond kind of our expectation. And we know that it's just, we're almost there, and we just want to do a little bit more wordsmithing. So just wanted to give that context to the extent that's helpful.
All right. Do we feel like we're ready for our Fista 5 goals?
I think so.
Okay, so this is our first vote.
Yep, this is the first vote. So you're voting on all of the standards except for standard 5 on this one. So if you're a staff person, please abstain from voting. This is really just for council members. Has the poll launched for you all?
Yes.
Okay, good. is there anybody who needs to still vote?
It appears Dr. Archer has stepped away from her computer, so we might want to give her a second.
Okay. Okay, we accidentally hit an end poll, so why don't we just share the results now? Do you all see the results on your screen? Sorry, we're having technical challenges on our end, but I'm glad that you can see. So we had can you just say out loud what the results are?
1, 5, 7, 4, and 7, 3.
Okay, so everybody was above a 3, the record. Okay. And stop sharing. Okay. Anita, did you have a chance to vote in that first poll? Oh, we can't. Okay, we can't hear you. We just wanted to make sure we captured your vote on that.
So I'm so sorry. Right at that moment, I have a great niece who had an emergency, and I had to take the call briefly. So I'm not certain I'll go forward with what we're doing with the majority. Thank you.
Well, we're gonna redo the vote then. Let's redo the vote. We're gonna do. It's really hard. Do you want to just launch the poll from your computer?
So Pooja, I wasn't quite certain what you were voting on as I left, and forgive me. It was the highest priority at that moment.
So we are voting on what's on the screen, going with the original. This is poll 2, y'all.
Yeah, I'm sorry, our numbers are all off. So we're redoing the vote 1 here in front of the screen. You're voting on all of the standards except for 5.
Yeah,
sorry.
So we pulled out that one that we will talk about next. So if those can re-vote who have voted, and anybody who didn't get a chance to vote, please vote on what is on the screen.
All right, we're sharing results here. With 1, 2, and the rest 3, 4s, and 5s. So do we want to create space for whoever voted a 2 to share rationale?
Yes. So Dr. Archer, what would get you to move to a 3?
Well, I still had certain ones that I wanted to have us look at that the subcommittee found were redundant or would not fall into the research on science of reading or science of instruction. And the document that Rhonda submitted had those comments in it. I was hoping that we would actually be able to look at those rather than just go forward without that information. So that was just as a follow-up of Julie's comment about the feedback in Rhonda's.
So if we can ensure that those recommendations are delivered to TSPC for their consideration as part of the larger recommendations from the council, would that move you to a 3?
My preference would be that this committee that was sending the standards forward would look at those before they went forward. But I will go along with democracy. Just know that that was my concern, is that a great deal of time was spent on removing redundancy so that, and some things that were not research validated. But I understand the need to have agreement too.
Appreciate that. Okay. So with that, are we ready to move on to the next vote? Okay, so this vote, which is labeled poll 3, but it is on this vote 2, is breaking down standard 5 into, again, the content is exactly the same, but having an option 1 into different groups or option 2 of putting them together. So right now you're voting with option 1.
I think we're waiting for 2 more people to vote. Okay, we're gonna stop the poll and.
Pooja,
Yeah.
sorry. This is Shauna's. I don't know what happened to my computer, but my Zoom died on my computer. Now I'm on my phone. My camera isn't working, but I didn't get to vote on this one.
Well, we should let you vote.
We're just launching another poll. Is everybody in the room? And everybody is present at their computers. So we're gonna do this one more time. We just have to get to 2 more votes. Okay, so this says poll 4. What we're voting on is decision point 2, which is option 1, to make it really confusing now. Just option 1. So I think on your PDF document with the recommendations on page 14, it says option 1. Ignore option 2 for now. You're just doing a fist of 5 on option 1. Okay, everybody is over a 3 on that one, so we have consensus. And then Co-Chair Gardner, I think we're ready for poll 2, or the option 2 now.
So the next vote is on option 2, which is keeping them together in one standard.
Why would we vote on that if we've already voted to separate them? I don't understand.
I think it was in case that there were people who were highly against it, but this might be in a way to indicate that they were more in favor of this other option. So I think it's perfectly fine for us to talk about whether, since we had 3, 4s, and 5s on the last, that maybe we don't need to have a vote on this one. Pooja, what do you think?
I think that people are sharing their votes, and let's just play this out and just screen share, and then we can discuss which one.
Can I get clarification though? Are we voting for
You're voting for
Option
option 2, Anita. Option 2 in the fist of 5. That's what you're voting on. And in a minute, we will stop the poll and we will discuss which option you would like, option 1 or 2. Is that clear? Great.
not at all?
So go ahead and vote on option 2, and then we'll compare the responses on both option 1 and option 2 and talk about next steps.
Good.
It seems like it might be helpful to just kind of reflect back, co-chairs, where you see and then interpret in these 2 polls to move forward. So I think, obviously there was a lot stronger support for option 1 to have them separated out and not as much support for option 2. Sarah said she was too late to vote. She picked number 2.
But in general, option one seems to be the more favorable option.
I would concur. Anybody else? Okay. Okay. So with that, we want to, I too am working with one screen and it is not easy, is it? So we want to make sure to reiterate about the review protocol. So I know that there are some remaining items that people want to make sure that are captured. The subcommittee had some recommendations from that. So we want to make sure that there is a chance for us, and some of these things I'll point out too, will come up in implementation. We haven't even really begun to discuss that. So it may be that some concerns and issues will come up in those conversations, which is our next step after including licensure. So those pieces may still be fleshed out. Wordsmithing recommendations, certainly we want to capture. And I know there's a document started that we can share that those can all be captured there, kind of a parking lot. We want to make sure that the spirit of those recommendations for wordsmithing, verb tense, other points can be reflected.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering about a compilation of those recommendations that we could, so with that that first sort of section, could we compile some of the recommendations that came through the survey today and just have that as for further review by TSPC? Does that seem reasonable?
How do folks feel about that?
Does anyone want additional time to put those in, or are you okay with us using the survey that went out for that purpose?
See some nods.
Is that something we could vote on, Pooja, as a recommendation that we submit recommendations for further review based on feedback received from the survey?
As a package or individual items?
I was kind of hoping for a package that we would compile those suggestions.
Yeah, of what would count under, if we were to create a new section, recommendations by further review, your question is what would it look like for us to package responses from the questionnaire / survey we sent out earlier for council members into that, and then propose it back to you all to vote next council business meeting. Is that correct?
Yes, I suppose it is.
I was thinking how we operationalize
yeah.
vote.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We could certainly do that.
Okay.
All right, any other questions about anything we just discussed? It was a lot to do in an hour and a half. We did it.
Susan, I just wanted to raise the question for the whole group one more time. A really good question was asked, but we didn't have time to answer it, which is what percentage of our educators in Oregon come from out of state? We talked about it in our small group, but I just wanted to bring it back to the whole because I think that'll be pertinent moving forward.
Thank you for reminding us, Heidi. Do our TSPC colleagues, are they here that they can chime in on that? I've heard different numbers.
Want to speak to that?
Sure. Hi, this looks like it's Melissa, but it's actually Elizabeth. Unfortunately, our data systems don't capture those numbers in any actual reporting sort of a way, but what we usually estimate is at least half of our educators come from out of state. And I know it came up in my small group too, that if about encouraging that people, if candidates know that when they come out of an Oregon program, they will have met these early literacy standards, it might encourage some of our people who are in Oregon to actually attend Oregon programs over some of the out-of-state programs.
Thank you. Rep Wright?
Yeah, just add to what Superintendent Brown said. What about administrators? Are we aware how many of those are out of state?
Administrators. I would say there are fewer. More of our administrators are prepared in Oregon. But again, no real idea for certain about that.
Thank you.
Any other lingering issues, parking lot topics for now? Sounds like our action item is to compile from the survey you all sent a package of recommendations that we would send forward, and that we'll bring those back to the next meeting for a vote. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I know it was a heavy lift today, and again, I feel really proud of the work that this council has done, really reflecting the true spirit of the Oregon Literacy Framework, and that we are really close to being able to move something forward that's going to really change how our children are educated in the state of Oregon. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.